Storytime with Stephanie
Hi,
Story.
I am art historical novelist Stephanie Storey. Welcome to my show Storytime, where I get to talk to other writers about their passions and their process. My guest today, I'm very excited about because her debut novel just came out in like March of 2021, just now. It's so exciting, such an exciting time in life. Her debut novel is called The Little French Bridal Shop. Welcome to the show, Jennifer Dupee.
Stephanie, thank you so much for having me. I'm super thrilled to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to ask you about what this experience has been like of seeing your baby out in the world for the last couple of months and all that. But before we get to that, please tell my audience at home about this very sweet, endearing, delightful story that you have written about this woman in Massachusetts. Tell us about the Little French Bridal Shop.
So, the story is set in motion when Larissa Pearl returns to her small seaside hometown upon the death of her great aunt Ursula. She's in a bit of a funk, she's just lost her job, she's broken up with her boyfriend, and she's struggling to really just cope with her mother's failing health. On a whim, she wanders into the local bridal shop and buys a dress, even though she has no groom. And soon word just spreads all over this small town, super small town, rumors spread that she's getting married. And rather than do anything to dispel the rumor, she perpetuates it. And as you can imagine, small town chaos ensues and the story develops from there.
Were you obsessed with weddings like before? Because you're
No,
married, like you were not like a big like not
no.
person like obsessing over this stuff before you got married.
No, I was never a big person obsessing over weddings. In fact, I was one of those people who thought, if I get married, that's great. If I don't, that maybe that's my path. And I got married quite late in life. I was, relatively, right? I was 38 when I got married. It was my husband's second marriage. So I did not really have this dream of like a fairy tale wedding or anything like that. Mm-mm.
Okay, so if you're not the person who flips through bridal magazines all the time and oohs and ahs over wedding dresses your whole life, where on earth did you get the idea? Like, why is this the story that stuck? Because for people at home, writing a book takes a very long time. They don't just come out of you, it takes a while. So you got to really be obsessed. Where did that connection come from if you weren't the not girl? Do you know what I mean?
I do. So, story almost always starts for me with setting. And in this case, my grandmother lived on the North Shore town, north of Massachusetts, seaside town of Beverly Farms for many years. And I went to high school in that area as well. So, this was a setting that was really deeply ingrained in my psyche and one that I just really drew on when I created my fictional town of Kent's Crossing, which was really loosely based on, or not so loosely based, really on Beverly Farms in Manchester by the Sea. And in that town, in fact, when I was in high school, there was a shop called French Bridals, and so this is a shop that just was there. In fact, I think I shopped for my junior prom dress there. So it kind of was just there. And in the opening pages of my book, I knew that my character had inherited this house. It was this house that I pictured kind of up on this hill in this small seaside town. And she wanders through the main street. And of course, in my mind was this bridal shop. So she takes a look as she's walking by. And this is before she goes in to buy the dress. This is when she's just arriving to go to her great aunt Ursula's house. She kind of almost flippantly like looks in the window, sees the mannequin with the dress and says, "Ugh, I'm never getting married." And as an author, we stage manage our characters, right? So to a certain degree, we kind of tell them what to do, and then they kind of take over and tell us what they're going to do. So when she made that statement, "Oh, I'm never getting married," I kind of thought, really? That's a big statement. That's a bold thing. What happens if I send you back to that little shop? What are you going to do? And so that's really where it came from and how the story started to develop.
Oh, I love that. I love that for lots of reasons. One is it's such an interesting process. I am such a planner. Like I know what all of the plot points are going to be when part of it's because I write historical fiction and you're writing contemporary fiction. So your characters, you can set up a world and just let them go to town. I have like a timeline I have to keep to, and this event happened here, and this is when this person dies. They can't really stick around. Like that's sort of the constraints of writing historical fiction. But you just got to set her loose, right?
Yeah, and I so admire historical fiction writers for that point that you made. It's true. I could set her loose, and there was maybe a certain timeline that I was working within, but you're right. I have a lot more freedom to kind of, see what will happen. And people often ask this question, right, of writers: are you a pantser or are you a plotter, right?
Hate those
And
terms, but go ahead.
I totally hate those terms. Totally agree with you. But pantser meaning writing by the seat of your pants. I like to think of it as sort of like letting the muse arrive and come to you. And plotter, is just what it sounds like, meaning I plot everything out. I have my outline. I stick to my outline. And when I was younger, I was really much more of a pantser. I kind of was like, let me see where the muse takes me. And I had a lot more kind of raw emotion the way we do when we're younger, and I would kind of like go with it. But I in my non-writing life, I'm an organizer. I really I want things to be predictable. I want to know where things are going to go. So I've become in my writing life much, much more of a plotter. So, even though I kind of sent her into that world to see what she would do, I then needed to kind of edit and kind of take what she would do and craft it into a narrative.
But let me go back and pick up the old house. So there
Yeah.
is an old house at the center of the story, Elmhurst. You also live in an old house, out like a
I do.
historic house.
I
What
do.
that has to attract you in some major way in your own life to live in one and to put one in a book. What is it about the old historic houses? Is it the stories? Is it the people? What is it?
I've always been fascinated by old houses, and it's something about, I think, the craftsmanship of it. I love just old materials, old solid wood, the way these old houses are built to last, and they're built, they're not cookie cutter, right? So there's a craftsmanship to them that I just find just so beautiful and so lovely. And in addition, they age with time, right? There's aged brass in these houses. There's leaded glass. To me, there's just something so kind of textural and visceral about them. So when when I met my husband, actually, I recognized he and I realized we both have a love for old houses, and we would often take walks down nearby Elmhurst Road where we lived, and we admired a historic house there. And we kind of imagined, oh, what if we lived there? Wouldn't that be cool? And during that time, I embarked on the opening pages of this novel, and I knew that there was a house in it, and I named the house Elmhurst in tribute to this house that we admired on Elmhurst Road. Flash forward a little bit, and we're actually house searching. We lived in a condo, and I had stepkids and I had a small daughter, and we wanted room for everybody. And so we started house searching, and the actual Elmhurst, the one that we admired on Elmhurst Road, went for sale. And we were like, oh my God, it's meant to be. It's in the novel. We wrote the letters the way people do to the owners. So anyway, long story short, there were like 10 bidders, and we came in second. So we didn't get the house. But now it was in my novel, and I just, it became really like a character in my novel. And several years later, we did actually find our own historic house, which is where you see me now.
Was this is your debut published novel? Is it your first novel or your first published novel?
Great question. It is not my first published novel. It is, depending on how you count, it is my first published novel, not the first one I've written.
Mhm.
Depending on how you count, this is my third or fourth novel. So I've always loved to write. I've always wanted to be a writer. It's something that I was always going to do. Whether or not I published, frankly, it's just I was going to be on to the next one. I started my first novel when I was 19. Um, I was in an advanced fiction writing class my freshman year of college, and I wrote a small little short story that I just thought worked well as a short story, and that was it. That's how I saw it. And this voluptuous Greek teacher that I had, her name was Eurydice Convaselli, and she said, "Oh, I'm not going to try to do her accent, but she said, "Oh, you just need to write a novel." And I thought, okay, and I spent the next 4 years trying to kind of work that short story into a novel. And I'd read all my life, but of course, learning how to, take those reading skills and those writing skills and crafting a narrative that has a narrative arc, that has resonance for readers, that has real plot points, like you were talking about before, is challenging. And so I wandered a lot trying to turn this raw kind of emotional book into a novel. So that one didn't get published. I had some interest, but I didn't quite make it. I wrote another one really quickly. I
Wait,
didn't shop it around. Yeah.
wait, you submitted the very first novel you wrote for publication trying to get it published? Oh my gosh, go ahead. Sorry,
I did, but
I just had to double check.
but just on that note, actually, I had no idea what I was doing from an industry standpoint. I was sending the book directly to editors, and really what you need to do is find an agent who loves your book and who can help you shape it, can give you feedback, who can then get it to the right editors, because it's really about finding an agent who loves your work, who has the network of editors, and then finding the right editor who can love your work. Otherwise, you're sending it really to a publishing house. Nobody has time, right? And it's not hitting the right editor. You're sort of it was like a stab in the dark. I actually got interest from Echo Press, but just as I was about to, kind of maybe develop that relationship, they got sold to HarperCollins, and so that sort of fell apart. So I had no idea what I was doing, Um, and then I wrote another one really quickly, and then I wrote a different one which I pitched to my now agent. I queried my now agent, and he asked for a 1 week exclusive, which, as you know, is a good sign. It means they're really interested. And he ultimately passed on that novel, but he said, what else are you working on? What do you got going on? And I had just started this novel. I was about 3 chapters in, and I had a really strong sense of where it was going. And I chatted it through with him, and he said, "Yeah, I think I'd like to see that. Why don't you work on it, and we'll kind of work on it together and see where we land." And long story short, here we are.
Oh, that's interesting. Because I was gonna ask, how did you know that this one was maybe gonna be the one? Like, was there a different feeling about it? But you already sort of had it in this pipeline a little bit by the time you were in the early stages. So that's how you would know that.
Yes, but there was a different feeling to it. There was something about this book that meshed for me from the very beginning. I thought about it constantly. So, like many writers, I have a day job, but when I was at my day job, I just found myself really thinking about this book, and I had a sense of its arc. I had a sense of what the story was. I wasn't totally sure where I'd be in the end, but I had at least kind of some scaffolding of like what it would look like. And serendipitous things kept popping up in relation to the book. I think, oh, that thing that I encountered in my real life, that would fit perfectly. That has a synergy to it. So there really was something that meshed about it for me from the very beginning.
How has the debut process been?
It's been great. It's
Good.
so interesting, it's been challenging because of COVID, of course. And my heart goes out to, authors such as yourself whose books were coming out right as COVID was hitting. Um, that said, I feel so grateful that I have my home, my health, and my family. I know so many people have struggled and, have been through much worse than I have. And so just my heart goes out. But then also, I've been really pleasantly surprised to see how the writing and the reading world has risen to this challenge. Like yourself doing these videos. I think it was choppy at times at first, but uh, readers are forgiving and they love their authors, and so it's been good. And on the flip side, just the fact that I can be on a Zoom podcast or, a crowdcast event, and my reach is so much stronger. My sister who lives in Seattle can join, people who can't come in person to an in-person event are able to join remotely. And that's like a silver lining, honestly.
How has it felt? Have you heard from readers yet? Have you like heard like stranger readers, like readers you don't know, you have
I
no idea?
have, and that's like the coolest thing. There's just people love, hearing about the old house. I had one crazy story. So let me just tell you a few
Yeah.
things about the book, no spoilers. There's a Rolls Royce in the book. There's also a couple plants that are recurring. There's one called, the Latin name for like a beach rose is Rosa rugosa, and there's repeated mention of that in the book. And the house, there is not an actual house that it's based on in Beverly Farms, but there's sort of like an amalgam of houses. So I did an Instagram live event, and my friend watched it, and she commented, and she took a screenshot of her comment in that and sent it to me. In that screenshot, I saw a comment from somebody else that said, "Why a Rolls Royce?" And I don't know what caused me to follow up on this because it wasn't during the live event, it was after the event. But she had friended me on Instagram or followed me on Instagram. And so I followed her back and I wrote a little note that said, um, I picked the Rolls Royce because I knew Larissa needed to drive it in the snow. And she said, "Why a 1979 Rolls Royce?" And I said, "Well, I didn't want it to be so old that she couldn't drive it through the snow, but but I wanted a kind of a classic car, almost like a wedding getaway car." And she wrote back and she said, "My house where I used to live is on the highest point on West Beach in Beverly Farms, and I used to have a 1979 Rolls Royce that sat at the gas station. There's also a gas station in the book for 2 weeks in the early 2000s. And I also planted the Rosa Rugosa on the beach because I liked it from Nantucket." And I was like, "Oh my God, is this the Truman Show?" Like that was the wildest, reader experience that lined up with the book. It's like the universe works in strange ways.
Isn't it so funny that sometimes the more specific you get in your writing, then it's so shocking that somebody else is like, "No, you were writing about me." And the number of people, I mean, she had a very particular, "You're writing about me."
Right.
But the number of people who will feel like, "No, you were writing about me. No, you were writing about me." It's so funny.
And it's not the first instance. That was the most specific instance, but there's another flower in the book, a really cool flower called the night blooming cereus, and somebody else has reached out to me and talked about, "Oh, my father cultivated night blooming cereuses," and that it's a cool plant because it will spend the whole year not blooming, and it might even spend years and years doing nothing. Like we had a cutting of one that we grew 7 years, it did nothing. Finally, this past September, it created its first bloom. And it was just mesmerizing to watch because the bud starts to form on the plant. And then eventually the day will come where it's going to bloom and it will start to open in the morning. It will be sort of like open a little bit at 9:30 and then 11 it starts to open more and then all day it does this until 11:30 at night. It's this giant white bloom and it's aromatic and it's fragrant. It's amazing. And then by the next morning it's gone. And so this woman who wrote to me said, my father would wake us up in the middle of the night to stay up to watch the night blooming cereus bloom in his greenhouse, and that was another just really fun you know moment of connection.
Oh, that's so great. Wait, are you also a flower person? So you're an old historic house
I
person. Are you also like a gardener
I
person?
am. I am. I mean, I haven't been a gardener for a while. When I was also 19, I worked in a greenhouse in the summers. And then one of my first jobs after college was in a greenhouse. And I loved it. I loved it. I could see myself going back to it sometime. It was so wonderful to be around living things and plants all day. And it, I loved it.
Oh, that's a nice way to think about it. Because I mean, that is what it is when you're
Yeah.
around
And
living things.
colors, vibrancy.
Right? Okay.
And also,
Okay.
also there's many stories there too. People come in, like characters come in, right? And you get to meet these people who tell you about their lives and they go on tangents and they're looking for flowers. And so on the one hand, you're helping them kind of fill their flower need and like what's going to look great in the planter in your front yard or your window boxes. But then you kind of hear these stories. Oh, well, my husband did this and that, and I love that part of it.
I have to ask, in your bio, you're the eldest of fraternal triplets. Okay, that is extraordinarily weird. I mean, very unusual. I don't mean it like in a derogatory. I just mean that's extraordinarily unusual to be the eldest of fraternal triplets.
It,
What is it like? Go ahead, answer, and then I have a writing question about it.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I love this. So yeah, and especially so I'm in my late 40s, so it's very unusual then. And let me tell you a quick tangent. My parents thought they were having twins. So ultrasound was quite primitive. It existed, but it wasn't all that accurate. And frankly, I don't even think they were looking for more than like two heartbeats. They were like, okay, yeah, there's definitely multiples and that's it, because it was so uncommon. And then literally until my sister was born, they thought they were having twins. So I was born first. My brother was born second, and my father literally said, "Oh, this is perfect. One of each. Which more can we want? Like a boy and a girl. This is great." And the doctor was like, "Well, one more baby." So talk about being like floored as new parents, right? And these were their first and only kids, right? So it's like you look at pictures of them the first like year, especially of our lives, and they're just like, what happened to us, right? So very unusual, as you said. And it's hard to say what it was like in a sense because I don't know anything different. This is my immediate family, my instant family, right? And I didn't have other siblings come along. But I will say my siblings and I are very interconnected. I think it's similar to the way that not normal, but typical siblings are, where you can finish each other's sentences and you kind of you talk in a kind of fluency that's greater than just with sort of acquaintances or friends.
Mhm.
But I would say that's even more amplified because of the triplethood. In addition, we each, especially as younger kids and then developing into like young adulthood, we each had almost our own like little personas, right? Like I was the writer, my brother was sort of the actor, and my sister was sort of the visual artist. And it's not that we all couldn't be those things, but we tended to like gravitate towards our little boxes in some ways with some overlap. And then in addition, my sister was very extroverted and my brother and I were more introverted. So my sister was very extroverted and my brother was kind of in the middle, and I was super shy and like quiet and introverted. And so we would assume these roles almost in like public situations. So if we were like meeting new people, right? My brother and I would be like, to my sister, go out and like meet those people. She's like our ambassador, right? Go check those people out, like report back to us, right? And so it took me actually a while, you know, into my like late teenage years and early sort of college years and into my 20s to kind of begin to develop these like other parts of my personality that weren't
Mhm.
taken over by like my triplet siblings. It's hard to explain because now I feel like I'm much less introverted than I used to be because that part of me sort of filled out and developed. I'm more sort of visually artistic than I used to be. And later in my high school years, I did sort of the actor stuff that my brother did. So it's interesting how that I feel like affected my identity.
The weird writing question I was going to ask, and there may be nothing to this, but I'm just going to ask it because I was thinking about when you grow up with two siblings that are your age, you're so there, you've got to have so much in common. You share so much when you're triplets, when you're doing all of that together. Writing is so much about writing novels anyway, is so much about relationship navigating. I mean, within the character building, right? You don't want to write a novel. You write novels in part because you're writing about human relationships with each other. Do
Yeah.
you think that you ever draw on that particular closeness of relationship in a way that gives you a different angle to relationships than other people do in your fictional writing world?
Yeah, in a way. And it's funny, in this book, this is the first piece of writing that other than like a personal essay or something, that I've really, this is the first piece of fiction where I really wrote about being a triplet. So there is a set of triplets in the book. And um, part of the reason that I did that was thematically. So the book is about, Larissa coming to terms with her mother's, worsening dementia. And obviously, dementia is a disease that affects the identity of the person, who's suffering from it. But it also really affects the people who are the caretakers, right? And she's just, in a way, sort of losing her mind, losing herself because she's just watching her mother, fail, and it's heartbreaking. And there's also a male character in the book who's the caretaker of the house. And I when I knew that he had kids, and as I began to realize that identity was one of these themes, I thought, what if I make his kids triplets, because it really amplifies this theme of identity. And they're not identical triplets, but they're like, my brother and sister and me, in that they're very interconnected. And so I do think it gave me sort of this amplified view of kind of what identity is and who it means to be somebody. And it's certainly one of the topics that I explore in the book of, you know no one person can ever know you. It takes actually multiple people to kind of know who you are. And and the tripling experience really helps in that understanding.
It is so true that a person needs multiple people to see them and understand them, and that you're different with different people too.
Right, and there's beauty in that. It's like it's amazing. Like, it's there's sort of sad in a way that no one person can know you, but then it's also wonderful that you can be a different person with different people, and different people see you in all these different um, ways.
You're obsessed with old houses. Great. You live in one, you wrote about one, and yet this novel is contemporary. Have you ever thought about, right? I mean, since I'm a historical fiction person and you live in an old house, I gotta ask, have you ever like thought about writing historical fiction? Is it on your mind since you do live in an old house and you are clearly drawn to some of the stories of history? Are you totally contemporary fiction sticking with it? What do you think?
That's a great question. So I think it would all depend on the story, and it's something I've been thinking about lately. If the right story came to me, I would certainly go down that road. I think of somebody like Kristen Hanna, for instance, who took a while. I think it was The Nightingale,
Yes.
right? But before The Nightingale, she had a whole bunch of books that were contemporary. And then she wrote The Nightingale, and now The Four Winds is also historical fiction. So I feel like if the right story came along, absolutely, I would go down that road. I'd be daunted at first because I know how much research is involved and how the timeline comes into play, but it could be a really wonderful challenge too.
Yeah, no, I just had to throw it out there and put it in your head since you're an old house person.
I'm glad you did.
Your brain is wandering around there somewhere. You might find something fun. One last question though. Do you have another book planned? Are you going to keep doing this? What is your thought after having done it once? You're going to keep throwing them out there in the world and see what happens? How you
Oh,
feel?
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, so I've got two books that I'm working on at the moment. One of them is just really still in gestation phase. I tend to when it's in gestation phase, I tend to kind of have a sense of the setting, a sense of the characters. I often sort of write down words that like belong in that world. And so that's where that book is. And I'm just waiting to like get my hooks into it. I don't quite know, what the catalyst is going to be. So I'm biding my time with that one. But then there's one I'm actively working on, which is quite different from this first published novel. And it's told from the first person narration of a 7-year-old girl. I have a 7-year-old, so maybe that's like kind of where it's coming from. And her parents are expecting her baby sister. Her mother's pregnant, and about 5 to 6 months in. And the story is set in motion when a strange man arrives at the foot of the driveway and claims that that baby could be his. Uh-oh. you know?
Well, we're back in the identity world though.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. In this book, definitely identity world. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Oh, good. Well, fun. Well, I'm glad you're still going to be out there writing novels, and this is just the beginning of a very long career, I hope.
Oh, I hope so.
Story time with Stephanie. Story time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story time with Stephanie. Story